Public information. Please pause the video if you would like to read the complete public information. In this video, we see how the chairperson of the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Committee, Suzanne Paddison, is covering up evidence of planning department malpractice supplied to the planning committee, which is relevant to her role as the Neath-Port Talbot Council councillor and chairperson of this committee. The planning department malpractice has almost certainly caused the death of Glynneath residents, and so it must be accepted that unless evidence can be provided by Neath-Port Talbot Council, then the deaths must be considered unlawful killing as defined by the offence Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act 2007. A recent report submitted to Natural Resources Wales shows that 20% of properties that have long-term occupancy in a Glynneath street bordering a landfill site have had a family member die from a rare neurodegenerative disorder in the last 5 years. This is approximately 112 times the national average. The report shows that the probable cause of these deaths is malpractice identified in the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department archives that breached the 1990 Environmental Protection Act and has placed Glynneath residents in danger from identified but untreated contamination from that date. Suzanne Paddison is the chair of the Planning Committee. She has overseen the cover-up of information presented to the Neath-Port Talbot Council and Planning Committee that provided evidence that the Neath-Port Talbot Council Planning Department worked with the Cuddy Group, and together they breached the 1990 Environmental Protection Act in a series of actions between 2008 and 2010. After methods of deception and blocking tactics were used by the Planning Department in relation to previously identified contamination at the development, we suggested to the former Neath-Port Talbot Council leader, Rob Jones, on the 19th of April 2020 by email that the Council had breached the 1990 Environmental Protection Act. The Council leader replied to our email stating that he would pass this information on to be included in the planning application report. On the 15th of May 2020, we copied the chair of the Planning Committee to an email that provided a more extensive analysis of how Neath-Port Talbot Council breached the 1990 Environmental Protection Act and identified that this was because of Planning Department malpractice misconduct. The Council leader replied to us on the same day and copied the Planning Committee chair to the same email. From this point onwards, the chair and vice chair of the Planning Committee, along with the Glynneath councillors Simon Noyle and Del Morgan, would have been aware of the process that led to the contamination being hidden at the Hale of Glyn landfill site. To understand why this is relevant, we should refer to the purpose of the council and the reason why we pay our council tax. Neath-Port Talbot Council exists to serve and represent the interests of its citizens and communities. We strive to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of all our people. Quite simply, Neath-Port Talbot Council exists to support the people who live in Neath-Port Talbot, and for no other reason. And the role of the Neath-Port Talbot Council councillor, as defined by the council website, is: local councillors are elected by the community to decide how the council should carry out its various activities. They represent public interest as well as individuals living within the ward in which he or she has been elected to serve a term of office. The role of an elected councillor on the planning committee is to represent the public interest. The public interest in this instance, I would suggest, being the 39 properties belonging to Glynneath residents who have objected to a planning application, mostly on the grounds that they are aware of toxic waste having been dumped in an area next to where they are living and of potential flooding from the tunnelling of a stream. To refer once more to the Neath-Port Talbot Council purpose for its existence, Neath-Port Talbot Council exists to serve and represent the interests of its citizens and communities. We strive to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of all our people. If we refer then to the Planning Committee meeting on the 8th of September 2020, 4 days previous to the Planning Committee meeting, we identified that the information we had provided the council leader, the chair and vice chair of the Planning Committee, along with Glynneath councillors Morgan and Noyle in April and May 2020, was not included in the relevant documentation for the meeting. We had provided information that the 1990 Environmental Protection Act had been breached in a previous planning application for the same development, and this information was missing from the documentation that was supplied by the Planning Department to the Planning Committee. We then prepared a draft document with the title Council of Death, which the Planning Committee received on the Monday prior to the meeting. We used the term Council of Death to highlight the seriousness of our concerns. The reason we submitted the report to the Council was included in the introduction on the front page of the report. It allowed Neath-Port Talbot Council the opportunity to provide counter-evidence to that included in the document. This report is being submitted to the members of the Neath-Port Talbot Council for the verification of information and the opportunity to provide counter-evidence to the information and allegations made in this document. The complete document can be found on our YouTube channel, Walk Around Wales, by searching for the term Neath-Port Talbot Council of Death document. In the opening address to the meeting, the chairperson mentioned that all members of the committee had received the document and that it was too late for the information to be included in the meeting.
Okay, you will all be aware that certain literature arrived yesterday. You will have all received literature. This will not take part as part of the proceedings today, but obviously you have had it, you have read it.
However, if we refer to the reply from the council leader on the 20th of April 2020, I acknowledge receipt of your email and will pass it to the relevant officers to be included in the planning applications report. You will see that Nicola Lake, who wrote the application report, is included in the reply together with Steve Ball, who made the application presentation in the meeting, along with Glynneath councillors Simon Noyle and Del Morgan, who were all copied to this email. The Planning Committee Chair, along with councillors Sean Percy, Vice Chair Planning Committee, Del Morgan and Simon Noyle Glynneath, were copied to the reply from the council leader on the 19th of May 2020. On the 20th of August 2020, we submitted 21 objections against the development to the Planning Department for inclusion in the Planning Committee meeting on the 8th of September 2020. Each objection included information that outlined the process of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act breach by the Neath-Port Talbot Council and specifically mentioned that the Curry Group had bypassed the remediation of the contaminated land process between 2008 and 2010. To summarise, the 1990 Environmental Protection Act breach information was passed on to the Planning Department by the Council Leader in April 2020, supplied to the Planning Committee Chair and Vice Chair in May 2020 by our group and the Council Leader, supplied to the Planning Department in 21 objections on the 20th of August 2020. If we refer to what the Planning Department representative Steve Ball advises the Planning Committee during the meeting that all our concerns had been summarised on pages 10 to 14 of the meeting documentation, we will see that the document failed to mention our concern for the breach of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act that endangered the lives of Glynneath residents. Also missing was information relating to how the Act was breached. If we listen to what Steve Ball said.
And in response, we have had substantial representations from the local community. Approximately 80 representations have been received, not from 80 individual properties. I believe it's somewhere in the region of 40 properties, but we have had a lot of representations, and all of their concerns have been summarised on pages 10 through to 14. Yep. And then
these communications provide evidence that the information relating to the breach of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act should have been included in the planning application report for that meeting. The Council allowed me 5 minutes to speak at the Planning Committee meeting on the 8th of September 2020. If we refer to the protocol of speaking at the Planning Committee meeting, we will see that I have every right to talk about contamination, incidents within the planning process, and the Planning Department malpractice. As such, my comments should have been noted. Most of you will have received our report on how the Planning Department broke the 1990 Environmental Protection Act. In 2010, the Planning Committee rubber-stamped Planning Department malpractice, and that has placed the lives of Glynneath residents at risk, and this includes my children. This is unacceptable. This is an unacceptable practice, and you are now aware. The chairperson of the Planning Committee stated after my representation that she had been very open on my comments, and I would like to say that they are your own personal opinions rather than anything else. The Environment Wales 2016 Act places a duty of care on the Council.
Right, I'm sorry Mr Richards, but that is the rules. You've had your 5 minutes. I have been very open with your comments, and I would like to say that they are just your own personal opinion rather than anything else. I mean, you're entitled to that, and that's what you come here to say. So thank you very much.
This would indicate that the chair of the Planning Committee discounted my representation, referencing it as personal opinions, whereas I stated during my presentation that I was representing the combined knowledge of around 30 council taxpayers in the immediate area to the development, who had asked me to represent them in the planning process for this application. Most had lived in the area for the majority of their lives. If we refer to what I actually said during the meeting about the developer Enzo Homes.
Okay, so we'll go now then to our first registered speaker, Mr Richards. And I believe, Mr Richards, you've been advised by Democratic Services that you have 5 minutes to address committee today.
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
You will be told by Tammy Davis when you're down to a minute.
Yeah.
So if you've got lots left to summarise, you can proceed from then on. So, Mr Richards, in your own time, if you lose connection, just contact Democratic Services and we'll see what we can do about that. Mr Richards.
Firstly, thank you for allowing me to speak. I've spent the last 3 days trying to get my representation
down to under 5 minutes and found it impossible. My document is 4 pages long and represents the summary of the combined knowledge of around 30 council tax paying residents of Glynneath, most of whom have lived next to the tip for the majority of their lives. I call it the tip because that's what it is, and that's what it has always been. A landfill site, a rubbish tip. The planning department took 52 pages to support a developer who has history of breaking the law, and here I refer to the 70 protected trees that Enzo Homes cut down in Penllygare. The judge who imposed the fine on Enzo Homes stated that this was a deliberate and defiant act. This survey was withdrawn because it showed that the majority of the site was contaminated and that areas of the site were unsuitable for development. The document includes statements such as, it is assumed that no development of the area in the southwest of the site adjacent to the stream will take place. It is assumed would suggest that only an idiot would build houses at the location. Or perhaps we should rephrase that to include a developer that lacks integrity, as is proven at Penllygare, and is happy to build houses and move on to other developments, leaving other people to deal with the subsidence and flooding problems caused by the development.
The opinion of our group was that Enzo had a history of breaking the law and that he lacked integrity, that he would be happy to move on, leaving other people to deal with subsidence and flooding problems caused by the development. 7 weeks later, Enzo was stopped from working on the site because he broke 14 of the conditions set by the Planning Committee in the meeting of the 8th of September 2020. But not before moving contaminated land towards the houses in Woodland Park and Lower Bryn Hyfryd. If we look at the area of testing from a document submitted to the Planning Department recently and an actual image of that area at about the same time of the testing in October 2020, we can see that the surface is of loose soil that has recently been moved from the central spoil heap towards the houses in Woodland Park and Bryn Hyfryd in an attempt to create a more uniform gradient. If we then refer to the image that shows the testing last October, we will see that an above safe level of dangerous chemicals has been exposed during the moving of the soil. And if we look at the depth of these harmful chemicals, we will see that they are mainly in the top layer of the soil. The top layer, as we can see, is soil recently moved from the spoil heap. The actions of the developer have exposed Glynneath residents to toxic waste, and we will potentially see an increase in cancer and neurodegenerative disorders in the surrounding area over the next few years. Our group's warning about Enzo was not heeded, and Glynneath residents living next to the development have been exposed again to a cocktail of dangerous chemicals. Their lives have been placed in danger as a result of Planning Committee malpractice. If you listen carefully to our group's opinions during the meeting about numbers 2 to 8 Bryn Hyfryd, and you will note specifically that number 2 Bryn Hyfryd is mentioned, and please note also our group's opinions too about the blockage of the tunnel.
Developer that lacks integrity, as is proven at Penllygare, and is happy to build houses and move on to other developments, leaving other people to deal with the subsidence and flooding problems caused by the development. We can see that this has happened previously in the same location. The Planning Committee should take time out to visit numbers 2 to 8 Bryn Hyfryd.
The reason we show this footage of a flood is because 11 weeks later, number 2 Bryn Hyfryd is flooded after the tunnel is blocked by Enzo's negligent actions. A young family had just moved into the house, and this is the second time that they have been flooded in the first week in which they had lived in the house. It should also be noted that a percentage of the water has flowed into the stream, flooding this property from the site, and so it contains a percentage of contaminated slurry. This is the week before Christmas, and the young family have a young baby who was born prematurely and so would be vulnerable to toxic waste. The opinions of our group, it would seem, have merit. This is because, as stated, I was representing the residents who have lived next to the tip for most of their lives, and who have an understanding of the site history that is second to none. I refer now to the in-depth, well-researched document titled Council of Death that was submitted to the Planning Committee and should have been accepted as a relevant document to have been discussed by the Planning Committee. I refer to the section of the document where we have identified specific safety issues hidden by the Planning Department in a geotechnical report submitted to the Council and to collated public health information received from our group. The report advised that dust suppression and a boundary fence were necessary to keep the contaminants from affecting local residents. But since this report was withdrawn and the contamination left unremediated, dust and vapours have regularly blown towards the houses of residents living next to the site, while the Cuddy Group tipped industrial waste. This dust has affected the health of some residents, several of whom have asthma. There are also incidences of children born with mutations and young adults dying from cancer. If we refer to the report recently submitted to Natural Resources Wales and featured earlier in this video, we will see that a member of our group has passed away since the committee meeting from a rare neurodegenerative disorder. So rare, in fact, that only 2 such deaths should occur in the whole of Glynneath, which has a population of just under 5,000, in a period of 40 years. However, 2 such deaths have occurred within a group of 5 houses at the closest area next to the development in a period of 2 years. These deaths can be linked to the contaminant arsenic, which was hidden at the site 2008 to 2010, as identified in our Council of Death document. Whilst our Council of Death document was put together reasonably quickly, the research into its contents had been extensive and over a period of 6 months. As stated in our representation to the committee, the planning chairperson, Suzanne Paddison, and committee were made aware of the 1990 Environmental Protection Act breach, and as such, the planning committee should have at least discussed the subject or undertaken due diligence and investigated the information contained in this document at a later date. A couple of days after the meeting, we forwarded the May email to the planning chair and vice chair, who then referred it to the head of planning, Kerry Morris. And on the 25th of October 2020, our communication was again referred to the head of planning and public protection, Kerry Morris, when we requested that every member of the planning committee answer the following questions in relation to the Council of Death document received. Please provide a detailed log of due diligence actions you have taken in respect of this information received. For example, did you manually check if the information contained in the document was factually correct within the Planning Department records? On the 2nd November, we received a reply from the Head of Planning and Public Protection, Kerry Morris, who suggested that our concern for the lives of our families was unreasonable. To date, no counter evidence has been submitted by the Council, and if you refer to the following YouTube videos, you will see how Kerry Morris, the Head of Planning and Public Protection, clearly misrepresents the role of the Environmental Protection Act 1990 in the planning process, and how Steve Ball misrepresents the role of Natural Resources Wales in relation to the tipping of industrial waste at the development. these public officials are clearly corrupt and they are being supported by the elected members of the Neath-Port Talbot Council. If we refer to the purpose of the council and the reason why we pay our council tax, we will see that Neath-Port Talbot Council exists to serve and represent the interests of its citizens and communities. We strive to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of all our people. And the role of the council as defined by the council website is: local councillors are elected by the community to decide how the council should carry out its various activities. They represent public interest. Suzanne Paddison, the chairperson of the Planning Committee, has known since May 2020 that planning department corruption has potentially caused the deaths of Glynneath residents. She is covering up information that has provided evidence of this to the council. The sole purpose of the council is to prevent such occurrences, and as such they should support those people who have identified such possibilities, or they should provide counter evidence to refute any allegations. In her role as a Neath-Port Talbot councillor and chairperson of the Planning Committee, she has not acted with a duty of care to Glynneath residents. She has not undertaken due diligence to support our community. And she has not taken the necessary precautions to safeguard Glynneath residents. Instead, Suzanne Paddison is supporting the past, present and future corporate manslaughter and homicide of Glynneath residents.